Did Elvis actually die in 1977? Or is the man in this picture from 1994 actually Elvis as he claims? And why is there verified DNA evidence and testimonial from various experts who back this claim?
He came forward telling the world Elvis Presley was alive. 6 years later, we checked back with a doctor who says his life will never be the same.
And that he was treating him.
I told the truth then, and I don't have any regrets about that.
Where is the doctor, and does he still claim to treat Elvis? Hear what he has to say 6 years later.
Is Elvis Presley alive?
Absolutely, I would testify it in a court of law.
Elvis Aaron Presley was an American singer and actor. Dubbed the King of Rock and Roll, he is regarded as one of the most significant cultural icons of the 20th century. His death on August 1977 at the young age of 42 shook the world and had millions in mourning. Many theories have circulated in the last 40-odd years, claiming that Elvis faked his death, and there have been many reported sightings of him, all of which have turned up a rational explanation. But there is one such theory that appears to hold some very convincing evidence, and this is what I want to explore. But before I do, let's recap on the circumstances that over the years have fueled the conspiracy theory that Elvis faked his death. Now, the gist of the conspiracy theory is that in December of 1970, President Nixon swore in Elvis as a federal agent at large. Elvis then spent the following years working undercover with the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. And through this appointment, he eventually gave up information to the FBI that led to the takedown of an international crime syndicate with ties to the mafia. And, in retribution, the mob put a hit on him, and Elvis was placed into the Witness Protection Program. His death was fabricated by the US Department of Justice using a wax dummy in the open casket funeral. Since going into hiding, Elvis has remained in contact with his family and has been seen in the public on rare occasions in the 90s. Believers of this theory thought that he would return to the public spotlight within the next few years. Now, this, of course, has yet to happen. Now, the bulk of this theory comes from three key components: his real-life involvement with the US government, the suspicious circumstances surrounding his death, and lastly, the various sightings of Elvis over the years. So, let's start with his connection to the US government. By 1970, Elvis had become an avid fan of law enforcement and had started to acquire a large collection of police badges, often getting one from every city that he performed in. Some of these even carried honorary titles, such as Captain Reserve of the Memphis PD. And this is important because when he wrote a letter to President Nixon in December of 1970, I think he really just wanted a badge to add to his collection. But in this letter, Elvis expressed interest in becoming what he called a federal agent at large. Now, this is something that he either heard or made up because it doesn't actually exist. He went on to say that he was concerned by what he saw as a decline in America with rampant drug use and communist ideas. He felt that he could be most useful in getting an anti-drug message to the youth. He thought this because, and I quote, he said, the drug culture, the hippie elements, the SDS, Black Panthers, etc., do not consider me as their enemy, or as they call it, the establishment. He later added, I'm right in the middle of the whole thing where I can and will do the most good. Also, the fact that he asked not to be given a title or an appointed position, I think led some people to believe that he became an undercover agent. Anyway, after dropping off the letter in the morning of December 21st, 1970, a meeting was scheduled later that same day between Elvis and Nixon at the White House. Now, during the course of their conversation, Elvis showed off a few of his police badges and then reiterated his knowledge of drug culture and communist brainwashing techniques. He expressed his desire to serve his country and help out with the drug problem any way that he could. Nixon agreed, and towards the end of the meeting, Elvis asked for a Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs badge to add to his collection. Nixon asked his aide to look into it, and Elvis departed. Later that day, he was appointed as a special assistant to the BNDD and received his badge, but that's as far as it went. It was an honorary position with no real authority. He wasn't sworn in, nor did he become an undercover agent. All right, let's fast forward a bit to May of 1976. Elvis was looking to sell his Jetstar aeroplane at this point. He had several private planes, and he needed to let this one go because it wasn't even airworthy. His father, Vernon, who handled all of Elvis's finance, was tasked with finding a buyer. And through his search, he met with a man named Frederick Pro, who encouraged Vernon to agree to a very complicated leasing arrangement with his company, World Aircraft Exchange. Unknown to Vernon was that Frederick was actually a con man and a member of a criminal ring with ties to the mob. By the spring of '77, Frederick and his partners managed to siphon off more than $1 million from the Presley estate. Now, at the same time, the FBI were conducting an undercover investigation into this group, and by mid-August of 1977, they were ready to bring their case to a grand jury. And by pure coincidence, Elvis died around the same time. So you can kind of see how people got the idea that Elvis ratted on these guys. But here's the thing, the case didn't even involve Elvis at all. He was purely a victim in the whole thing, and even the FBI agents involved in the case say that Elvis had no idea that an investigation was going on before he died. Which brings us to the fact that we really don't know what killed Elvis. We know that his girlfriend found him unresponsive on the floor of his upstairs bathroom. Then even though he was officially pronounced dead at 3:30 p.m, he most likely passed away between the hours of 9 a.m. and 11 a.m. that morning. An autopsy was performed at 7 p.m. the same day, but the report was never publicly released. And even stranger, the Memphis medical examiner announced that the official cause of death was a heart attack, but this was in the afternoon, way before the autopsy. The pathologist performing the autopsy thought this was possible, but also suggested that he could have died from polypharmacy since he had at least 8 prescription drugs in his system at the time of his death. In the years since, several medical experts have looked at the report, but none of them have come to the same conclusion, which leads some believers to claim that this is evidence of a cover-up. But determining the cause of death isn't an exact science, and Elvis wasn't in the best shape. We know at the time of his death he was suffering from diabetes, glaucoma, an irregular heartbeat, high blood pressure, liver damage, and constipation, the last of which was most likely caused from all the drugs that he was taking. This fact alone led at least one medical expert to conclude his heart stopped while he was straining too hard on the toilet, as those who saw him lying face down on the bathroom floor said that he looked like he'd slumped forward from the toilet. Now, believers have attributed the fact that the autopsy report is private and not available to the public, meaning it's another piece of the cover-up. However, the reality is because the overseeing doctor concluded that he died from natural causes and not from a drug overdose or foul play, the report remains private. Had he concluded otherwise, then it would become public record. Ultimately, this has more to do with Tennessee law rather than a carefully arranged cover-up, it would seem. Then there's the issue with the medical examiner's report, which some people claim Elvis wrote himself. Even in a 1991 TV special, they got a handwriting expert to claim this as fact. And this brings us to the funeral, which happened 2 days later on August the 18th. Now, there's a theory that a wax dummy was used in place for the open casket viewing, and this comes from a photo of Elvis on the cover of the September 6th issue of the National Enquirer. A lot of people thought that it didn't look like Elvis at the 70s, but more like Elvis of the 1950s, with a weird pug nose. Those that were at the viewing said that Elvis looked really bad in the casket, and he might have even been wearing a wig, which contrasts with the photo. Most likely there was some photo manipulation done, or that they faked the photo using a picture of a younger Elvis. We'll never really know the full story, since the original negative was conveniently destroyed in a fire. Also, with over 1,000 people in attendance, you would think that at least one of them would notice a wax dummy. There were also reports that the 10 pallbearers had trouble lifting and moving the coffin, which supposedly weighed 900 pounds, much more than a normal casket. Now, this led some people to speculate that it was fitted with some sort of cooling system, which made it heavier. This system was used to keep the wax body from melting under the warm Memphis sun. However, when I look at the footage of the funeral, the pallbearers look more like they're struggling to walk as a group. Plus, Elvis's longtime friend and road manager, Joe Esposito, said the casket weighed 900 pounds because it was made of solid copper. And finally, we have the curious case of his gravestone spelling his middle name with 2 A's, when his birth certificate has it listed with 1. As many see this misspelling as another clue, but I think it has more to do with his grieving father respecting his son's wishes. According to Marty Lacker, Elvis's close friend and co-best man at his wedding in 1966, he asked Elvis why he spelled his name with 1 A. Elvis replied it's because his parents weren't great at spelling when he was born. Elvis then turned to his father and said, "From now on, I want my middle name to be spelled with 2 A's, just like in the Bible." His 1972 divorce documents confirm his legal name status with 2 A's. And this brings us to the last component, arguably the most infamous and entertaining, the Elvis sightings. Now, I don't have time to cover them all, but I'll go through some of the most well-known, starting with the earliest, in which someone claims to have seen Elvis at the Memphis International Airport on the same day that he died. Elvis reportedly bought a ticket to Buenos Aires and went by the name of John Burroughs, which is what he used when checking into hotels to avoid attention. The only problem is that the Memphis airport did not offer flights to Argentina at the time. There's no record of a passenger by the name of John Burroughs, and there's no source witness. The next big sighting occurred on a New Year's Day tour of Graceland in 1978. Mike Joseph snapped a pic of the pool house, and only after getting the film developed, he noticed what looks like to be Elvis sitting in the pool house. It was later determined to be a photo of Elvis, his security guard, and touring wardrobe manager Al Strata, but that didn't stop the photo from making the rounds. Then in 1984, a photo was published showing Muhammad Ali with Jesse Jackson, and lo and behold, in the background is Elvis Presley. Now, this wouldn't be that far-fetched if Elvis was alive, since he and Muhammad Ali were friends. But the truth was, the man in the photo was Elvis's agent, Larry Cole. Also, in 1988, a string of sightings occurred in the Kalamazoo region and in Michigan, beginning with a report of Elvis at a Burger King. These sightings became a lucrative subject matter for the supermarket tabloid weekly World News, whose outlandish coverage turned the conspiracy into a phenomenon in league with UFOs and Bigfoot sightings. Then, in the 1990 film Home Alone, a recent theory claimed that the bearded gentleman in line behind Catherine O'Hara was Elvis, but he was later identified as Gary Grote. Then, in 2016, this footage of a man on the grounds of Graceland surfaced, leading some to believe this was Elvis hiding in plain sight. Of course, this later turned out to be an employee of Graceland. So, let's look at the story regarding whether this man, Jesse, could be Elvis. If he was alive today, at the release of my video, he would be 86. The picture of Jesse was, however, taken in 1994, so if it's Elvis, he would be 59 in the picture. There was a Memphis Commercial Appeal newspaper story in October 2008 about a woman claiming that she was a secret half-sister of Elvis and that she had the DNA to prove it. How did she get the DNA? From Elvis, because he was alive, of course. Eliza says that she has the DNA results from testing a man named Jesse. Eliza says that Jesse actually is Elvis. That's right, he's alive. Jesse/Elvis is the one who gave her the DNA to test. And Eliza says that he also had details about her family history he couldn't have known unless he really was Elvis, because she was given up for adoption when she was a baby. She originally had sued to reopen the estate of Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, to prove that Vernon was her father. Her lawsuit was indeed proceeding, although slower than they'd have liked it to for a number of reasons. Getting the estate of Vernon Presley reopened was the first step. That alone was a big accomplishment because no Presley estate had ever been reopened, despite the number of people claiming to be related to Elvis.
The case of a woman claiming to be Elvis's half-sister will move forward in the courts. The estate of Elvis Presley's father has been reopened. Now, this comes after a petition filed by a woman claiming to be Vernon Presley's love child, which would make her Elvis Presley's half-sister. Fox 13's Lauren Lee joins us here in the studio with more on this perplexing legal affair. Lauren?
That's right, Steve. The petitioner says she has DNA evidence to prove she is the daughter of Vernon Presley. She says a DNA sample of Elvis's proves that she is the king's half-sister. And she says she got the sample from Elvis himself. This is Eliza Presley. The Washington state resident is in Memphis to prove she is the daughter of Vernon Presley, the half-sister to Elvis Presley. Eliza and her attorney appeared in probate court Wednesday.
Our facts came out strongly, and we simply want a day for her to be heard when all of the proof can come out.
Eliza Presley, who recently changed her name from Alice Tiffin, did not speak on camera but made her case in open court. She says she supplied Elvis's DNA to the firm DNA Consulting, and the results prove she is Elvis's half-sister. She says she got the DNA evidence from Jesse Presley. She says Jesse Presley is the assumed name of Elvis Presley. So her claim is Elvis himself licked an envelope and sent it her way. She says DNA Consulting processed the sample this summer, even comparing it to DNA from some of Elvis's first cousins.
And they've been tested and retested by various labs, and the proof is conclusive that her allegations are correct.
Eliza says her quest to find her father started when she found out she was adopted. She says her birth mother lived across the street from Graceland and says she spent time with the Presley family as a teenager. But she says her mother denies Vernon Presley, 25 years her senior, is the father. The attorney for Elvis Presley Enterprises was speechless when asked about the claim that Elvis lives under the assumed name Jesse, and surprised the judge reopened Vernon's estate.
We've only had to come into court on two, but we've had at least at least a dozen people claim that they are primarily children of Elvis. This is the first child of Vernon that we've had.
Probate court judge Karen Webster said by reopening the estate she was not ruling on the paternity or heirship, but her ruling does allow the case to go forward.
I don't understand what the purpose is going to be. We're going to have a reopened estate, but she's not going to determine heirship, and there's no money.
Eliza said she just wants to be acknowledged by the Presley family. Eliza Presley's attorney says reopening the estate allows her to issue summons to parties connected to Vernon Presley's estate. Elvis Presley Enterprises attorney says she has no case because of statute of limitations and adoption laws. The next hearing has not been scheduled. And I just got off the phone with the DNA specialist out of Arizona. He says he believes Eliza is Elvis's half-sister and that Elvis is still alive. He says the proof is there. DNA evidence doesn't lie.
So Eliza's claim is that she's the daughter of Vernon Presley, the father of Elvis, but she bases her claim in part on evidence from a man who Eliza believes actually is Elvis Presley, still alive. So Eliza says that she never suspected Elvis might be alive when she began her journey. Rather, according to Eliza, she only wanted to find out who her father was. Eliza was 13 when she learned that she was adopted as a baby. Several years later, Eliza met her birth mother, who gave Eliza the name of a man who was supposedly her father. But when Eliza contacted him, he was adamant he wasn't her father and didn't even know her mother in 1961. So Eliza had to look elsewhere. Later in life, she and her husband at the time had been shocked when seeing pictures of Elvis as a young child, how much he looked like their 3-year-old son, Andrew. Eliza knew that her birth mother had lived across the street from Elvis at Graceland shortly after he bought it in 1957 to 1958 and had been friends with his family. Here you can see a picture of Elvis and Eliza's birth mother and aunt. Eliza's husband even suggested that Elvis may have been the father because she shared a family resemblance, not to mention the fact that Eliza was the only one of 4 children given up for adoption. So Eliza had wondered for some time if she could be the daughter of Elvis, but she never brought into the whole Elvis is alive movement when she started her search. People who believe that Elvis did not die on August 16, 1977, like to point to a book published in 2001 and written by a board-certified psychiatrist named Dr. Donald Hinton. He wrote it with a mysterious co-author named Jesse. Dr. Hinton claimed Jesse was actually Elvis, having faked his death with the help of his manager, Colonel Tom Parker. Jesse, by the way, was the name of Elvis's identical twin brother, who was a stillborn. So he lost his brother at birth, who was an identical twin. According to Dr. Hinton, Jesse had to get away from the life of Elvis for several reasons, primarily because of his poor health and due to threats against him and his family. Colonel Parker agreed to help him because he could earn lots of money from doing so, Dr. Hinton said. Indeed, Elvis has been at or near the top of Forbes' list of the highest earning dead celebrities for years. Dr. Hinton said that he treated Jesse for nearly 6 years for pain management due to his arthritic condition and other medical problems. He claimed that Jesse opened up to him and told him of his true identity.
Joining us now, Fox 8 News reporter Suzanne Stratford. Suzanne.
Well, Wilma, as you know, we received so many emails and so many phone calls, we had to bring you this update. This was no ordinary doctor. He was credible, successful, and made these extraordinary claims. He said Elvis Presley was still alive and that he would be coming out. And because of pending investigations, the doctor could not go on camera with us at this time, but he did work with us in updating this story, showing us new, startling turns in this case.
If you're looking for trouble, you came to the right place.
Life made him famous. Death made him immortal.
I'm only made out of flesh, blood, and bone.
Many claim he's still alive. A Kansas City doctor substantiated those claims.
I would never treat anyone without seeing them eye to eye And it is truly Elvis Aaron Presley. There's absolutely no doubt.
When we first met Dr. Donald Hinton, he was a successful board-certified psychiatrist and medical doctor. 2 years later, his career is ruined.
It's been very stressful.
Stressful because of countless investigations.
There are people trying a lot of different things to discredit me.
The scrutiny started after Dr. Hinton announced he was treating a patient who claimed he was Elvis Presley. The man used Elvis's deceased twin brother's name, Jesse Presley. They published a book, The Truth About Elvis Aaron Presley in his own words. In that book, Jesse said he faked his death for health reasons and his family's safety. He promised to come forward.
He has, as of this stage, he has not indicated to myself or any of his other friends that he does not intend to follow through with his plan to prove himself by the end of the year, to let the world know that he is still here.
The year came and went with no Elvis or Jesse. Instead, Dr. Hinton rang in the new year with the Missouri Attorney General's office. A complaint was filed with the AG. Dr. Hinton, his assistant Linda Felix Johnson, and Elvis's second cousin Jerry Presley were accused of fraud. The complainant said various gifts, like Bibles, were sent to Jesse through Hinton's website, that Hinton actually kept them. An investigation cleared the trio of any wrongdoing. All of the presents that were sent to Jesse went to Jesse.
We understand the skepticism.
His book included many handwritten letters by Jesse and said it was Jesse's way of reintroducing himself to the world. There were a few problems with Dr. Hinton's story. One was that he promised during interviews he did about the book that Elvis, or Jesse, would reveal himself to the world in 2002. Obviously, that never happened. Another was that the book led to investigations of Dr. Hinton for mail fraud by the Missouri Attorney General's office, as well as by the DEA, and by the Missouri State Board of Healing Arts for illegally prescribing medications to a patient that he'd never met in person. Dr. Hinton actually surrendered his ability to prescribe medicine and was placed on 5 years probation by the medical board. But the Dr. Hinton investigation did lead to an interesting place. When Dr. Hinton came under attack, his patient Jesse wrote a letter to the Attorney General supporting Dr. Hinton and refuting the mail fraud claims. He included the following in his letter. "Sir, I don't know if you believe in my continued existence or not, but if I continue to expose myself like I did in the book, I'll be eliminated very easily. Pure and simple as that."
We submitted a public information request and got this copy of the Missouri Attorney General's report. But inside the envelope, the documents raise more questions than answers. Take a look at this letter Jesse sent to the Missouri Attorney General. He writes, "Dear Sir, Dr. Hinton was not involved in any conspiracy. These are all good people who, because of their love for me, got caught up in this mess. If I continue to expose myself like I did in the book, I will be eliminated very easily."
If a right-handed person, you see, had a tilt or slant.
That letter was reviewed by an international graphologist, Shirley Mason. Her analysis is part of the Attorney General's report.
That handwriting remains constant. It's as exact as a long math problem.
Shirley's analyzed handwriting for 23 years, 10 with the Kansas City, Missouri Bureau of Investigations.
Not only did I work on cases of forgery, but on criminality cases. My work stands up in court as concrete evidence.
These are supposed to be 5 original letters.
2 years ago, we hired forensic document examiner Mary Kelly to review Jesse's letters. She compared them to a letter written by Elvis in 1972 to Richard Nixon. After extensive testing, her results were inconclusive.
I couldn't say that they were the same writer, and I certainly couldn't say that they weren't the same writer.
That was forensic science. In graphology, Shirley's results go a step further.
Yes, it's that same pattern. Unmistakably.
Graphologists determine a person's psychological, social, occupational, and medical attributes from the configuration of their letters, their lines, and paragraphs on a page. It's more personality focused. In the AG's report, Shirley concluded that Jesse is Elvis.
The same person wrote everything I have seen, and I didn't know that it was Elvis Presley.
But graphology is not universally accepted.
No, the handwriting does not lie.
Shirley points out, though, it is widely used in Europe, the FBI, and in big business.
No one else can write in the same pattern as someone else, no matter how clever.
What does Graceland make of all of this? Well, we wanted to talk to Elvis Presley Enterprises. That's the corporation that runs Graceland. But they sent us this letter. They write, "The book is so completely ridiculous that we will not dignify it with participation in your story. But thank you for offering us the opportunity."
The Attorney General's office had their letter analysed by a special type of handwriting expert, Shirley Mason, who was a certified graphologist. Graphology is commonly used by the FBI and throughout Europe, but is not universally accepted. Mason worked for the Kansas City Bureau of Investigations for many years, successfully using graphology as evidence in criminal court cases. Shirley Mason reported that she compared the Jesse letter and other documents written by him to past letters written by Elvis. So what did she have to say about it? Not only did they match, Mason wrote that she would testify in court under oath that Elvis has to be alive. She felt the handwriting was unmistakable. The Attorney General's office dismissed the charges against Dr. Hinton, and the DEA never brought charges against him. Linda Hood-Sigmon is one of the biggest proponents of the Elvis is alive theory and has a great deal of evidence on her website. She points to this picture of Jesse and says it was taken on a visit to Lisa Marie Presley so he could see his grandchildren. She states that the controversial photograph marks the first time that Jesse met his grandson, Benjamin Storm, in 1994. I'll leave links to her website and her YouTube channel in the description. Now, because of Dr. Hinton's book, a television reporter in Cleveland, Suzanne Stratford, began investigating. She interviewed Dr. Hinton on camera and analysed the evidence, including the Mason report. A picture taken 6 months after the funeral of what looked like Elvis peering through a screen door and certified by Kodak, and the fact that Elvis's tombstone lists his middle name as Aaron when it officially records his true middle name to be Aaron with one A. Stratford also reported that Dr. Hinton had passed a lie detector test. And there's more. Stratford reported that she was contacted by Jesse.
But someone else did call. Jesse himself. He contacted me asking for our help.
"Hi, we can't come to the phone right now. Leave a message and we'll call you back."
She asked for and received a sample of Jesse's DNA in 2002 so it could be tested. Fox 8 News did in fact test a DNA sample against the known control samples of Elvis, including a 1975 liver biopsy sample and tissue from his autopsy. The problem is that they didn't match. But again, another interesting turn. Not only did the Jesse sample not match the other two samples, but they didn't even match each other. In other words, Elvis's autopsy tissue did not match the liver tissue from 1975. So, where did the autopsy sample come from? Does this mean that Elvis's autopsy was faked? Maybe. Stratford also interviewed cousins of Elvis who said that the body at the funeral looked like it was made out of wax rather than being real. But, of course, there's only one person alive, other than Jesse, of course, who can definitively prove or disprove that Jesse is Elvis, Elvis's daughter. Fox 8 News contacted Lisa Marie Presley's representative and asked for a sample of DNA to find the truth. She declined. In 2008, Stratford interviewed Eliza Presley as part of her ongoing investigation. Fox 8 News sent the 2002 sample it had received from Jesse to a lab so that it could be tested against Eliza's DNA evidence. Now, Eliza had never been an Elvis fan, but her youngest kids were. They had spoken to Elvis's cousin on his father's side, Donna Presley. Then Eliza contacted Donna through a website. Donna had authored books about her memoirs of Elvis, and Eliza wanted to buy a copy of each for her kids. Donna sent the books to Eliza's children, aged 6 and 10 at the time, in July of 1999. When her youngest child spoke with Donna, she had asked if Donna could send her something that belonged to Elvis. So Donna Presley then sent Eliza's children a sealed envelope with strands of her hair in it. Eliza was shocked when she saw the envelope, realising what Donna had enclosed. She knew because a single red hair strand was sealed halfway out of it. She remembered a conversation with Donna where she joked that her hair colour was courtesy of Miss Clairol. They'd been discussing the premature greying that was a Presley family trait. Eliza locked away the unsealed envelope, unsure what to do with it. Then Eliza had a cancer scare in 2000. She decided it was time to really start trying to find her father again, because what happened if she died and neither she nor her children ever knew the truth? After researching how DNA worked and looking for a lab, Eliza shipped Donna's envelope along, hoping it could shed some light. Eliza refers to this initial testing as her jumping off point. Either it was going to show something useful to confirm her suspicions, or prove that she was very wrong and never thinking that she was related to Elvis Presley. The lab sent the results in October of 2000. They showed that Eliza was, in fact, related to Donna Presley. When she questioned the people from the lab further, they told her that Elvis could possibly be her father. They also said that if her father was not Elvis, it was someone very close to him genetically. Eliza knew that Elvis never had any living male siblings. It never before occurred to her that Elvis's father might also be her father. Between the suggestive but inconclusive Donna Presley early DNA test and the fact that her birth mother lived near Elvis and had been friendly with him, Eliza was determined to proceed with her quest to find the truth. In March of 2001, Eliza and her family travelled to Graceland. Through a mutual friend, a meeting was arranged with Lois Smith Black, Elvis's maternal aunt, related through marriage. Lois's daughter Brenda lived with her, and Brenda was a blood relative of Elvis, so his maternal cousin. Eliza asked if Brenda would contribute a sample of her DNA so that she could have it tested, after showing both Lois and Brenda her DNA testing with the Presley side of the family. Now, later that night, Brenda unexpectedly left without saying if she'd cooperate or not. But her mother, Lois, was sympathetic to Eliza, and she asked if DNA could be taken from cigarette butts, like on TV. When Eliza answered that it could, Lois pointed to the ashtray that her daughter had been using that night, and she stated that it was her house, so that was her trash too. So she put them in an envelope for Eliza and sealed it. Lois also gave her own sample, a cheek swab, to prove that Brenda was really her daughter. For years, Eliza did nothing with the Brenda sample. Between her divorce, moving to Washington, medical problems, and her financial limitations, her search stalled again while the DNA sample stayed locked away in a safety deposit box. Several years later, Eliza picked up the trail again. This time it was not a cancer scare, but a close call on a snowy highway in the February of 2004. Once again, she could have died without knowing the truth. Eliza tried unsuccessfully to track down DNA either from Elvis's daughter, Leah Marie Presley, or from Elvis himself. She contacted several collectors of Elvis memorabilia, hoping for a match. However, after asking how viable DNA from an item which predated 1977 would be, she was informed that there would be many concerns, such as cross-contamination, and it would probably not be worth the cost of testing, much less purchasing the various items. For years, her efforts were in vain. She says she kept ending back at square one. She submitted a DNA sample plus the Donna sample to a lab in Canada that specialised in DNA testing of even old objects. Eliza contacted Fox 8 News to get permission to test again against an older sample that they had from a former friend of Elvis, who owned a swatch from a blood-stained pair of jeans that he claimed belonged to Elvis. Unfortunately, the blood sample was too contaminated to work, so Eliza then asked to test against the Jesse sample. Fox 8 News sent that sample to the same Canadian lab, and the initial testing showed that Jesse was not Eliza's father. It was the only test that she'd requested. But the DNA revealed a much closer relationship than two unrelated people. So Eliza asked the lab if they could do further testing. And what happened this time? The results, drum roll please, a match! The Fox 8 News sample from Jesse in 2002 showed a half-sibling relationship with Eliza in April of 2008. Additionally, the lab reported that the Jesse sample also matched the Donna Presley early sample, which had in turn matched with Eliza as well. So by then, Eliza accepted for the first time that this Jesse person had to be Elvis, the Elvis Presley. So she had to speak to him. She needed to tell him that he had a sister and to find out if their father, Vernon Presley, ever knew of Eliza's existence. Eliza was able to get through to a man who went by the name of Byrne, who was featured in the Dr. Hinton book from 2001. Byrne passed messages between Eliza and Jesse. In one of their conversations, Byrne said that he was instructed by Jesse to ask Eliza about her aunt Louise, whom Elvis had known from his Graceland days in the late 50s and early 60s. Eliza realised Byrne was speaking to the actual Elvis. Eliza had only given the name Elizabeth Presley rather than a birth name, Alice Tiffin. No one but the real Elvis could have ever known who her aunt was, especially since the name that Byrne knew her by at that point was Elizabeth. Eliza was stunned. She says she knew at that instant, even if she had no DNA proof, She knew that it was in fact Elvis Presley that she was dealing with. The problem at the time was that Eliza couldn't do anything with this knowledge. Eliza had been required to sign a non-disclosure agreement with Fox 8 News about Jesse's DNA sample from 2002. This meant that she couldn't tell anyone of the DNA results without the approval of Fox 8 News. At that point, she did not care. She felt that she knew the truth finally, even if she couldn't go to court with it. But Jesse was there to help, whether intentionally or not. In the first package she sent to Jesse, Eliza included a small note card that was blank on the inside. She attached a post-it note asking if Jesse would fill it out and mail it back to her with a pink envelope that Eliza had self-addressed and stamped. It took Jesse so long to return it to her that she had completely forgotten about it. 3 months later, the pink envelope came back. In late July of 2008, Eliza did not hesitate in sending it to the Canadian lab. She had to know if it really came from Jesse or Elvis. A couple of weeks later, she got her answer. The pink envelope was found to have been lick-sealed by the same person that had submitted the cheek swab DNA sample back in 2002 to Suzanne Stratford at Fox 8 News. Eliza was overwhelmed and elated at the news. This meant that she too now had Jesse's DNA profile, and the constrictions of her arrangement with Fox 8 News no longer applied. The last piece of the puzzle was to send those cigarette butts from Brenda Smith. Once again, the lab results came back positive. Brenda Smith did indeed match Jesse as a first cousin, just as Donna's had against Jesse's and Eliza's own had to Donna's sample way back in 2000. In other words, according to Eliza Presley, her own DNA sample matches Jesse's, which in turn matches both samples from both Elvis's paternal cousin as well as his maternal cousin, plus her own sample also matches Elvis's paternal cousin. No one alive could match these, Eliza says, but Elvis himself. Someone had to be the offspring of the union between Gladys and Vernon for this to happen. Elvis is that offspring, and Jesse had to be Elvis. The lawyer investigating this case read all of Eliza's reports from the Paleo DNA laboratory in Ontario, Canada, which analysed the DNA. In fact, it's one of only many labs that have examined the DNA at different times, but it's the only lab to have issued reports about all of the various samples. This Paleo DNA lab reports show Eliza and Jesse are 1.6 times 10 to the 5th power times more likely to be half siblings as compared to an untested, unrelated person of the general population. These statistics indicate that these two individuals are likely to be biologically related as half siblings, sharing one parent. The likelihood of Jesse being Eliza's father is 0. Jesse and Brenda Smith, the recognised maternal first cousin of Elvis, are 418 times more likely to be related than someone from the general population, suggesting that they are biologically related. Jesse and Donna Presley, the recognised paternal first cousin of Elvis, are 45.7 times more likely to be related than the general public, again indicating that they are likely to be biologically related. Eliza and Donna Presley are 31.95 times more likely to be related. So once again, they are likely to be related. The 2002 Fox TV Jesse sample was a 100% match with the 2008 Jesse sample, the pink envelope sent to Eliza. These reports show that Eliza and the person now referred to by many as Jesse are half siblings. And Jesse in turn is biologically related to the known cousins on both sides of the family tree to Elvis. Because Elvis never had any full siblings other than a twin Jesse, who was stillborn, no one else could match cousins on both sides but Elvis himself, unless somehow his twin didn't actually die. This could be, a possible part of the conspiracy theory. Maybe Jesse is actually Jesse Presley, and he lived a full life and then came out later on. Who knows? Anyway, think about it. Who else is related that close to your cousins on both sides of your family? Only you and your siblings. And I'm not the only one who read the reports and came to this conclusion. Suzanne Stratford did another report on Fox 8 TV News about Eliza's DNA evidence. This report concludes that the samples do match.
And the woman who claims she is the king's half-sister and that Elvis is still alive. But whatever happened to the doctor who started all of this? Fox 8's Suzanne Stratford finds out for us.
What's it like coming back here?
It's painful to think about it again.
Kansas City psychiatrist Dr. Donald Hinton was summoned back to Memphis to meet with attorneys.
A lot of mixed emotions. Mostly, I don't want to be here.
The attorneys represent a woman named Eliza who claims she's Elvis Presley's half-sister. Lab reports suggest that her DNA not only matches the Presley family, but also matches a man who claimed he was Elvis back in 2002. And his DNA matches both sides of the Elvis family tree. The man, who calls himself Jesse after Elvis's deceased twin brother, was Dr. Hinton's patient back in 2002.
Is Elvis Presley alive?
Absolutely, I would testify it in a court of law.
In 2002, Jesse claimed he was Elvis and that he would prove it to the world right here at Graceland on the 25th anniversary of his death. But that day came and went with no Jesse and no Elvis. What was it like for you when he didn't come out?
It was very, very difficult.
But Dr. Hinton doesn't blame Jesse.
I mean, he mentioned specifically people by name who run this enterprise that they have said to him that, you know, you're never coming out. He has talked about how much money they make every month and how much money they were going to make in August of 2002. And he told me, he said, son, it's all about the money.
Attorney Bill Bradley represents Elvis Presley Enterprises.
Our position is that that's just nonsense.
Dr. Hinton still stands by his story, even though his reputation's been tarnished by it.
People have called you crazy. People have called you delusional. People have said you made this up. People have said you were dealing drugs.
No, none of that is true. Yeah, I'm still a physician in good standing with the state of Missouri, fully practicing. And the Jesse thing is what it was. I told the truth then, and I don't have any regrets about that.
Hinton no longer treats Jesse or speaks to him directly.
It's a relief to not be his physician anymore, but it's just still very sad.
Dr. Hinton stopped seeing Jesse after several investigations in 2003. The first, by the Missouri Attorney General's office, cleared him of any wrongdoing. But the Missouri State Board of Healing Arts made him temporarily surrender his DEA number or license to prescribe certain medications because of the various pain pills given to Jesse.
It hurt me to know that my children were hearing these things that weren't true.
Hinton worked hard to get his life and career back on track. Then he learned of the lawsuit filed by Eliza in Memphis. It surrounds that DNA Jesse gave us back then. When Hinton heard a judge had reopened the estate,
I think I was numb. I just was in shock because I had put it.
State News.
Eliza also sent the results to another independent DNA company to verify the results. The lab owner, Dr. Donald Yates, said publicly that the DNA supported Eliza's claim and that Jesse had to be Elvis. And yes, he said, this means that Elvis is alive. So, taking all this into account, does this mean that the world is ready to believe Eliza? No, not quite yet. So, Elvis's death is a truth that has been accepted for nearly 45 years. Eliza is literally trying to rewrite history here. She's going to need absolute, undeniable proof before she can garner widespread acceptance. So while the evidence I've seen is strong and compelling, I believe that the public will need to see something more direct and concrete to prove a conspiracy this strong. Relying on blind samples provided by cousins outside of court process is not enough to change the history books. There are only two ways to do so. One would be for Lisa Marie Presley to come forward and provide a little saliva for a DNA test. The attorney for Elvis Presley's enterprises said in the past that Lisa Marie won't, because once she does it for one person, then she'll have to do it for everyone else claiming to be related to Elvis. The problem with that excuse is that Eliza is the only one who has ever presented enough evidence to convince a judge to reopen a Presley estate. Like, no one else has gotten that far. So, I mean, secondly, if Lisa Marie provides the DNA once, there would be a record of it. So she wouldn't have to keep submitting other records. You know, you only have to do it once to have a record. The one sample could be tested against everyone or anyone claiming to be related to Elvis. So why not do it? Why not put this all to bed, huh? So far, she refused to cooperate when asked by the Fox TV news team in Cleveland, even though it would have been, quickly ended this entire debate. In fact, Lisa Marie moved to London shortly after Eliza Presley's lawsuit was refiled in August 2010. Eliza said at the time that she would try to compel Lisa Marie to provide her DNA through the ongoing court case. But if Lisa Marie remains in Europe, that's not going to happen. Which means there was only one other option to conclusively expose the conspiracy to the world. Vernon's grave would have to be exhumed and his body tested. And while they're at it, Elvis's grave should be opened as well. I know, it sounds very distasteful. The investigating lawyer asked Eliza about doing that very thing. She didn't want to do it unless she had absolutely had to. When he first asked her about that possibility, she said it was unthinkable. What if she's making the whole thing up? If Eliza invented all of this and the DNA wasn't from Presley relatives, but is really from her own cousins, and none of them are Elvis's relations, then all of the following would have to be true. Jesse would have to be in on it because his DNA matches Eliza's, so they really are half siblings, regardless. That would mean either she or Jesse would have had to track the other down, despite their age difference, because Eliza was adopted as a baby and didn't know she had a brother. They would have also had to track down cousins from both sides of Jesse's family, which again would have been tough because Eliza was adopted. The would-be scam would have been started back at least 2001, because that's when Dr. Hinton's book about Elvis being alive was published. The scammers would have had to then fool Suzanne Stratford and her bosses at Fox 8 TV News, unless they're in on it, of course, because they never would have done the stories if they thought Eliza and Jesse were committing fraud. And then finally, they would have had to have fooled Dr. Yates and his DNA company, as well as Shirley Mason, the graphologist, amongst many others, not to mention the Missouri Attorney General. So, plus they would have had to have a plan to submit the Jesse DNA to Fox 8 TV News back in 2002, and then had to wait to spring their master plan into action in 2008, like 6 years later, because Eliza's 2008 sample from the pink Elvis envelope and a 2002 Jesse sample that Fox 8 TV News had tested match each other. So why begin a scam in 2001 only to wait until 2008 to see it through? Not to mention the fact that if this was all a master scheme to defraud the public through a court proceeding, why would they have done it knowing that it would be so easy for the plan to fall apart? Elvis Presley Enterprises simply has to march into court with DNA of Lisa Marie, or even one of the two cousins tested for that matter, and then she could prove in a snap that that's not true. Unless, of course, it is true. In other words, if this was a fraud, it would have been so easy for the Presley camp to disprove it that no one would think they could get away with it. Yet, no one came forward in the court case to stop Eliza. In 2011, Eliza's case was dismissed on jurisdictional grounds. This meant that the court in which she filed her lawsuit was not able to hear the case. Rather, the case had to go to a different court. Because of this and other legal hurdles, Eliza has never had her day in court to present her evidence to a judge or jury. As wrote then, Eliza was at the end of her road, emotionally and financially, and was not able to continue with the case. Trying to rewrite the history books, which is what Eliza was literally trying to do, is no easy task. This is especially true when there are those who will go to extraordinary means to try to stop her. There was one theory a few years ago that pointed to this black and white photo that some claim is actually the same man as Jesse. This is Reverend Dale Presley. He died in 2011. And I must admit, he looks extremely similar to Jesse. However, after reviewing other images of Dale, the resemblance is less evident. But a lot of people were using this as evidence to try and dismiss and debunk all this evidence that Eliza had. I think a grainy black and white photo, it's a stretch, but I mean, this does look quite a lot like him. But if you look at these other photos, you can see that the resemblance, that there's not so much, and it doesn't refute DNA evidence. And lastly, I'd like to point out that every link on the blog of the lawyer around Eliza's case, that I'd used a lot of material and clues from to continue this investigation that I've done through this video. So every link that he had put on there to point to various articles, videos, newspapers, etc., every single link was broken. All supporting evidence appears to be deleted off the internet to this whole blog. I'm amazed that this blog's still up, but it is this lawyer's own website, so that is harder to delete than anything in the public. I mean, well, I say public domain, but you know, anything on public forums and you know, video sharing sites. So this is the blog. The link's in the description. Link to Linda Hood-Sigmon's website. Nope. Here's an example of a recent article written. That one works. Fox 8 news video stories are available on YouTube. Here's the one from 2008. Nope. Unavailable. So here's Fox 8 TV news link about Eliza's DNA evidence. You can watch it here. Nope. Nada. Here's a Memphis newspaper article about it. Nope. This is definitely not an article about it. What are your thoughts around this whole case, this whole story? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. Did Elvis really leave the building, proverbially, in 1977? Or, you know, did he fake his death and continue living? And does that mean that he could possibly still be alive today? Is that him, this Jesse in the picture, 1994? What of this DNA evidence? What of the graphologist and others that swear down that this, you know, this man is Elvis? Let me know what you think. Guys, please remember to like and subscribe to my channel. Hope you like the video. If you'd like to support my channel and my work further, there is a link in the description. And as always, follow MC for Truth.